Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, thanks everyone for joining today. Awesome to see a lot of people who are excited to learn more about the spelling bee. And okay, so by way of introduction, I'm Shobha, one of the founders of SpellPundit, and we, as you all know, are a preparation platform for students who are serious about getting really good and competing at the National Spelling Bee, and as well as learning as well as for younger students who are starting to get into the spelling bee and want to explore if it's a pathway that they want to go down. And we're really lucky today to have some of the best spellers in the country speaking to us and sharing some of their insights around how they prepared and how you all can also become really, really, really great spellers. So about me, I am now recent college graduate, but I competed in the Scripps National Spelling Bee in 2013, 14, and 15, was a semifinalist each of those years, and started SpellPundit when I was in high school with my brother, who was also a Scripps National Spelling Bee finalist twice. And it's a family affair now, and all of us are involved in SpellPundit. We host all of our spelling materials on the internet. So if you're not familiar with SpellPundit, go check out spellpundit.com to get access to some of those materials. And we also host a national spelling bee every year virtually, where we help right before the Scripps National Spelling Bee, where we have junior and senior levels, and everyone can compete in the bee and do a practice run before the national bee. So I will share slides today and just kind of introduce our panelists, who are all amazing spellers, and then we will go ahead and jump into questions. So, and just some housekeeping rules. If there are any questions, please stay on mute the entire time so that we don't disturb our panelists. But if there are any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat, and then between the different sections, we'll go through and look at the chat and answer any questions live that are of interest to people. So any questions that come up, just type them in the chat and we will eventually get to them. But we have a pretty clear list of questions that we've sourced from you all before the start of this presentation, and all of our panelists are prepared on those questions. So we'll walk through every single one of those. But so just wanted to share this last Scripps National Spelling Bee, there were 11 finalists, and 10 out of those 11 finalists were SpellPundit students. So really excited to have a strong showing on the finalist and National Spelling Bee stage. 7 of those 11 finalists are with us today to share more about their experiences, how they prepared, how they got started with the spelling bee. And collectively, these panelists have over 25 years of spelling bee experience, which is especially exciting when you consider that all of them are less than 15 years of age. So really excited to have everybody with us today. And as a kind of overview of what we'll talk about today, so we'll take about 2 hours, maybe a little bit less, but on the safe side, we'll say 2 hours. We'll do introductions for all of our panelists and share a little bit more about them. And then we will jump into the panel discussion with them. So the first topic will be about their spelling bee journey and how they got started. The second will be about preparation, strategies, tactics, and tips that they have. The third will be about coaching and how they use spelling coaches, if they use spelling coaches. And the fourth topic will be about at the bee and being on stage and what the bee experience is like and how it's helped them. So first panelist we have is Dave Shah. He's from Largo, Florida, and is in 9th grade, so just retired from the spelling bee. He participated in the Scripps bee in 2019, 2021. Oh, sorry about that. 2019, 2021, and 2023. He was a runner-up at our 2022 SpellPundit National Spelling Bee and just won the Scripps National Spelling Bee this year. So very excited to have Dave with us today. Our next finalist is Charlotte Walsh. She's from Arlington, Virginia, also just retired from the spelling bee, so she's in 9th grade. And she participated in the Scripps bee in 2019, 2022, and 2023. And she was a runner-up at this year's Scripps National Spelling Bee. So we're also very excited to have Charlotte speaking to us today. Third panelist is Shraddha Rechamreddy. She's from San Jose, California, is in 8th grade, so this will be her last year in the National Spelling Bee. And she she won the 2022 SpellPundit National Spelling Bee, won the 2023 North-South Foundation National Spelling Bee, and has participated in the Scripps Bee in 2019, 2022, and 2023. And this year at the Scripps Bee, she tied for third place. So very excited to have Shraddha sharing today as well. Next, fourth, we have Surya Kapu. He's from South Jordan, Utah, is in 9th grade, so just retired from the Bee. He was fourth place in the 2022 SpellPundit National Spelling Bee, participated in the Scripps Bee in 2019, 2022, and 2023. And this last year at the National Spelling Bee, he placed third place nationally. Our fifth panelist is Vikrant Chintamoyana, also from San Jose, California. He's in 9th grade, so just retired. Participated in the SpellPundit online bees in 2022 or 2021 through 2023, so 3 years. He placed 16th in 2021, 5th in 2022, and 3rd this last year at the SpellPundit National Spelling Bee. And this year placed 5th at the Scripps National Spelling Bee. Fourth panelist is Dhruv Subramanian, San Ramon, California. He's in 8th grade, so this will be his last year. He won the 2019 North-South Foundation Spelling Bee and competed at the SpellPundit Bee for the last 3 years, and this year placed 5th at the SpellPundit Bee. And this year he participated in the Scripps Bee for the first time and went all the way up to 5th place, which is a great accomplishment. So excited to have Dhruv. And then Pranav is our next panelist, Pranav Anand. He's from Glen Mills, Pennsylvania, and is in the 9th grade, placed 7th place in the North-South Foundation National Spelling Bee. And he participated in Scripps for the last 3 years, and this year placed 10th at the Scripps National Spelling Bee. So those are all of our panelists. Really, really exciting to have them all and some really, really great accomplishments. So yeah, if everyone is ready, all the panelists, can you just give me a quick thumbs up if you're ready to go? Okay, beautiful. All right, let's jump into our first question. So there's a lot of people here who are newer to the spelling bee and are starting to get to learn about how to start preparing, especially for younger spellers who are maybe first, second, third graders. And there are also some older spellers who are 5th, 6th grade who are also getting started. So we'd love to hear from people about, for those new to the bee, how did you start preparing? And maybe we can start by having Dave just share a little bit about how you started preparing for the spelling bees and whether you started younger or older and what worked for you.
Yeah, thank you. So my first spelling bee was in 2nd grade, but I genuinely feel like I didn't seriously start until 5th grade. So it doesn't matter what age you start at. You can start at 6th grade, 5th grade, 2nd grade, it doesn't matter. But if you're like in 2nd grade or 3rd grade, I just recommend just exposing yourself to words. Like you shouldn't really be, I don't know, like you shouldn't really be doing level 3 at like 2nd grade. But if you're like in 5th grade and 6th grade, I'd recommend, also getting exposed to words, but really starting with CWL or level 1 or list 1 through 4. Yeah.
Awesome. And can you share a little bit more about what were some of the word lists you started with? So you said CWL, some of the SpellPundit lists. What were those?
So I started with level 1, which is basically now lists 1 through 4. And then I worked my way up to level 3 until 7th grade, which is like, I don't know how it like works with a list, but yeah. And then my final year, I did level 4 and geographical module, new online, basically everything in my final year.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. Very helpful. And also curious, Shraddha, I think you started a little bit on the younger side. Curious if you can share a little bit about how you were preparing when you were younger versus how that progressed as you became older.
Yeah, mostly I agree with Dev. I think like the most helpful resource for me has been SpellPundit. So when I was younger, I would first like start with maybe like level 0 and CWL, which is currently level 1 in SpellPundit. But for like older spellers, I think like those words would most likely be known already. So starting with like more advanced modules like level 2 or 3 would be more applicable.
Awesome. And how did you get into the spelling bee in the first place? And when did you start?
I think I had my first B in kindergarten, but I wasn't really serious until sixth grade.
Great. Okay. Then super helpful. And curious for this next question, this was a pretty popular question we got from a lot of people, is how did you all prepare for the spelling bees and what are your best spelling bee preparation tips? So maybe for this question, let's start Charlotte, if you want to chime in with some of your thoughts on that question.
Hi, so I prepared for spelling bees in a variety of ways. I made sure to use all of the things, all of the study tools that were most available to me. SpellPundit was incredibly helpful. Words of Wisdom and my coach's resources also really helped me. Some tips that I have for right before bees are make sure to drink a lot of water and try and be confident on the stage. Remember that you've studied a lot and you know what you're doing.
Awesome. And Pranav, anything to add to that question about how you prepared for the spelling bees and what your best tips are?
So I use SpellPundit for the majority of my preparation for the school bee and regional bees. I mainly use level 1 because those are the words that tend to appear the most. Obviously, you want to become fully thorough with whatever Scripps gives you, so Words of the Champions, which changes every year. And I also, I used SpellPundit level 1, level 2, and level 3. And I also used Words of Wisdom for learning roots and patterns for languages. I would say the best tip is to have a consistent study plan that you can consistently do every day so you don't fall apart.
Great. Okay. And lastly, Dave, do you want to chime in as well if there's any other thoughts you have on preparation
Yeah.
tools or tips?
Like I feel like there are enough tools and people have already covered that, so I'll just focus on tips. I feel like you just have to make sure that you're doing enough every day and you're having a balance. So you're going through enough roots every day, but you're also going through enough spell pundit every day. So I'd also like, sometimes you might have a bad day, right, at school. And like I would have bad days too. So sometimes I just not study, which is totally okay. But then I realized that like, if I wanted to win, I had to at least do something every day. So even if I had a bad day, I would just do like at least 3 hours. So yeah, just consistency.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good tip. And it seems like a couple of you have said this. The key here, and this was important for me when I was a speller too, was to consistently practice every day. It's not as helpful to do, 12 hours one day and then not touch anything for, 3 or 4 days. What's pretty useful is going through, even if you do an hour or 2 hours every single day and you're consistent about it, that's often better because a large part of this is that there's so many words and you have to continue to remember them. And just continuing to be really consistent is okay. I know there's a couple questions in the chat about the words of wisdom. We'll answer that through text or through the chat. But this next question is also a little bit about word lists, so maybe spellers or panelists feel free to chime in. But another thing that's coming up is that there's lots of word lists out there. There were a lot of word lists out there when I was a speller. There's even more now. So Words of the Champions is one of them that comes from the National Spelling Bee. Words of Wisdom is a book that comes from a former speller named Scott Reamer. You can find that on Amazon. Of course, there's SpellPundit's materials, which are meant to encapsulate the entire unabridged Merriam Dictionary. There's the Consolidated Word List, which is also another publicly available list. And there's a lot of other ones too. Curious for you all, panelists, what materials and resources did you use for spelling bees? But also, what order did you study them in? What did you start with? And then how did you progress as you got older and more experienced? Maybe let's start with Vikrant, if you have any thoughts on that question.
Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, a lot of people they say use the CWL, the Consolidated Word List. So that's a really good starting point for spellers after they've like mastered almost at the regional level. And after that, there's a really good book called Words from the Champs. It's by Jairam and Sriram Hatwar. Both are previous Scripps winners. And that book, I've noticed a lot of words asked in spelling bees like Scripps and SpellPundit bees. A lot of words come from that book. So that's a really helpful step after CWL.
Perfect. What about you, Pranav? What lists did you use and how did you what order did you study in?
So the order I used was I first made sure I was thorough with Words of the Champions, which Scripps gives you. Then I made sure I was thorough with CWL, which you can use level 1 SpellPundit for. Then I made sure I was thorough with everything in Words of Wisdom. That has a word list and patterns, so you want to make sure you're thorough with everything in that. And then you can sort of step up what modules in SpellPundit you're doing. Level 2 and level 3 are very good for practicing words. I did level 2 and level 3. Words from the Champs is also a very good resource.
Great. Okay. And Charlotte, any final thoughts?
Yeah, so if you're a newer speller, what I did when I was first starting to get interested in spelling was I made sure to do the words that would come up like most commonly in B's first. So I started with the consolidated word list and I kind of worked my way up through the levels of SpellPundit. Make sure that before B, you know whatever list is provided to you. So make sure that you've studied Words of the Champions extensively.
Great. Okay. And super helpful. So there's a question that's coming up in the chat, and I am curious what you all will say. So two questions are coming up. First is, how many hours did you study each day? And how did you balance the spelling bee preparation with other commitments you had, like school or other extracurriculars? And Dhruv, if you have any thoughts on that, would you like to chime in with anything you have to say there?
Sure. For studying for a lot of hours on end, like, don't waste your time studying, if you know what I mean. Like, study with a clear goal in mind, a clear focus to what you're going to achieve today. So think of it day by day, just go by baby steps, day by day, how much you're going to study, what you're going to cover, and just keep it simple like that. So I currently have a lot of extracurriculars right now. So what I would do is I would get done with the homework and all of my classes first, and then with what time I have left, I would divide it into spelling and downtime.
Super helpful. Okay. And what about you, Surya? Any thoughts on how many hours you studied and how you balanced it with some of your other commitments?
So I would say on average I studied 45 like 4 to 5 hours a day and maybe a little bit more on the weekends. But I think what's more important than like studying for like a lot of hours is consistency. So if you're studying like 10 hours one day and then like 30 minutes the next day, that's not really that effective. So I think being consistent is more important. And as for like balancing it with other like activities, it's just really important to manage your time and try not to be distracted by things that aren't really helping you.
Yeah, those are good tips. I think some thoughts on this additionally. I think what Surya is saying about consistency is really important, and studying consistently every day, even if it's not 4 or 5 hours every day, even if you start with 1 hour every day, consistency is much more important than the number of hours. And also, as Dhruv said, the quality of your preparation is much more important than how many hours you do every single day. And I think a lot of these spellers would resonate with that. If you do 10 hours of preparation and don't remember any of the words you study, that's not useful. But if you do 30 minutes of preparation and you remember all of the words you studied, that's really useful. And this is a marathon and not a sprint. I did spelling bees myself for 5 years. I'm sure a lot of, as you saw on the bios, a lot of these spellers and panelists we have today have been doing this for at least 3, maybe more than that, 3 to 6, 7 years even sometimes. And so it is a marathon. And so you don't have to study 10 hours every single day. The quantity or the quality of how you study is much more important than the number of hours. So awesome. And the last question we have for this first section is, spelling can be a pretty dry subject, especially if you're trying to do it as a memorization game and memorize every single word. And, as you all know, there are 120,000 words in SpellPundit. There's 500,000 words in the Unabridged Dictionary, which are, of course, consolidated and made more simple in the SpellPundit factors, or in the SpellPundit website. But it's still a lot of words. And for you all, how did you make spelling interesting? and how did you get motivated to study it? So maybe Pranav, if you want to start off.
Yeah, so spelling, it can be a dry subject, especially if you're just memorizing. The way I sort of added variety is I did different things in different orders. So I would do one SpellPundit module, and then I would orally quiz words, and then I would study roots, and then I would do vocab, and I would just mix everything up so I wouldn't be the same thing over and over again. That just makes it really boring. And so you want to just keep it consistent, just with a variety of study techniques. And you shouldn't really you shouldn't hate studying. You should sort of actually want to, because if you don't like it, then there's no point.
Yeah, definitely. And Dhruv, what about you?
So I have a feeling, so to spelling, many people call it a dry subject, but first of all, your drive to learn is what drives you to do spelling. So what I usually do is I take small goals for every day I study and take frequent breaks. So don't study for like 6 hours on end and then expect to achieve more than you would do in 1 hour, because mental capacity reduces every hour you study. So there's no need to study 6 hours if you're going to do it on end. Take frequent breaks for every hour you do studying for.
Awesome. Good advice. Good advice. And also let's do one more. Shraddha, do you have any thoughts on how you made spelling interesting for you?
Okay, so for one thing, doing spelling, I feel like when you first start, it might be a bit dry, but the more you do it, the more you start to like it, because more than being dry, spelling has like a lot of facets in it, and you can find that it's a lot more than you expected it to be. But if you do start feeling like tired or something, make sure that you take a break in the middle, and just go do something to clear your head. Because once you come back, you'll find it much more interesting.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's very important to keep in mind that this is a marathon and not a sprint, especially if you're trying to get to the national final level. So don't burn yourself out trying to study 10 hours a day. It's better to do 1 hour consistently over 5 years. So perfect. Those are all really, really great answers. So thank you all so much. And if there's any questions, keep continuing to put them in the chat, and we'll get to all of the questions as we go. But let's transition into our next section. And this is the one that is probably going to be our longest section, around preparation tips and how to prepare for the bee. So I think the first question that most new spellers have is, how do you know what words to memorize, and how do you know whether to focus on learning roots and learning language patterns? And Surya, you're pretty well known within the spelling bee groups for being really, really strong at roots. And so let's start with you. What are your thoughts on memorization versus roots and language patterns?
So for memorization, I think any word that you can't really like understand with language patterns or roots in them, you should memorize that. Like if a word doesn't have doesn't conform to its language's like rules and patterns, you should memorize that. And I think for learning roots, it's just what I did is I just searched up words with specific roots in it, and just like see how that root applies to the words that it's in, and that's how I learned a lot of roots.
Awesome. And just, did you start by learning roots and then memorizing? Did you do both at the same time?
I think, yeah, I mostly, it was just like at the same time. Just as you learn more words, you just pick up more roots as you go.
Definitely. Okay. And Dave, what about you? How did you decide what words to memorize versus when to focus on roots and language patterns?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clearly obvious when a word is an exception. Like, I just feel that there has to be a balance, and I think balance comes with practice. Like, it's not something I can explain. Like, balance is different for everyone else. Maybe some people like to break up the word, while some people just like to memorize things. it's okay to memorize some things. Like everything requires memorization, but as long as you're not just 100% memorizing the dictionary, that's okay. But you just have to have balance. It's different for everyone.
Yeah, and they've just so people have a sense of this. Why is it important to learn roots and language patterns?
Yeah, so when you're on stage, I have two reasons. Um, the generic reason is it'll help you guess, but the less commonly known reason is it's kind of like an insurance system. When you're on stage, there's a lot of pressure and you're gonna forget a lot of things. I like to say that you have 80% of the knowledge you have when you're on stage because of all the pressure. Um, so roots and language patterns are kind of like a insurance system. So if you don't know the word or you just forgot it, you can at least, come back.
Awesome. Yeah, and then Surya, if you do you have any other thoughts on why it's important to study roots or language patterns?
Yeah, so instead of memorizing like a bunch of words, if you know like a specific root, like that root can apply to like let's say 30 words. So just by knowing that root, now you know how to spell like a bunch more words just by knowing that one root. So just yeah, I think learning roots and language patterns are crucial just because knowing those makes it so that you don't have to memorize words. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's really helpful. And what we say with SpellPundit is up until a certain point, it is pretty helpful to just focus on memorizing and kind of building up a fundamental word base, especially for younger spellers who are, first, second, third grade. Building up a knowledge of words is really useful, and memorizing might be the best way to do that. But there's a certain threshold that you start to hit where after that, it becomes easier to, as Surya said, learn one root and then have that spread to 30 different words. So one good example of a root actually is the root word tele, which in Greek that means far. And so you'd memorize that, and then you would know that in telephone, that is TELE. And you would know for telemetry, that would be TELE. Or telescope, that's TELE. And so you can see that there's a lot of words that have that same language pattern, and you can almost like add them up together like they're math by knowing that first root and the second root of all those different words. And so roots make it such that after a certain point, you can, because again, there's 120,000 words in the SpellPundit word base. And after a certain point, knowing the roots helps you sort of scale very quickly and learn more words and grasp them faster because you know the building blocks of the words. And learning the building blocks helps you learn faster as well. And so that's how you can learn really, really quickly a lot of words. So hope that clarifies it. If there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But let's move on to the next question. And we'll start with Charlotte here. So the next question is around how your study strategy changed between your more local levels, like your school bee or your regional bee, and how that changed once you got to the national spelling bee. And were you studying more? Were you studying different things? How did things change for you?
So after regionals, I definitely started preparing more intensively. I made sure to review my weak points. Like for example, if there were words at the regional bee that I didn't know, I would go over those and similar words. And I also started focusing on vocab because my regional bee doesn't have vocab. And I was only studying vocab a minimum amount before regionals, but before Scripps, I made sure to really pay a lot of attention to it.
Great. Okay. And what about you, Pranav? Any thoughts on that too?
Yeah, so for me, between regionals and national studying became a lot more intense. I started spending a lot more hours, and yeah, as Charlotte said, I started putting more time into vocab. My regional B doesn't have vocab either, so I didn't study vocab really at all before Scripps. And then after Scripps, you start putting time into vocab, so you have to split your time in between spelling and vocab. You also start learning words from harder resources like SpellPundit modules 2, 3, 4. Also words from the champs.
And so the next question, we have a lot of people asking this in the chat. So lots of words to memorize and learn. over time. And you all are probably spending time revising your old words as well as learning a lot of new words. And there's a balance to strike between that. So a couple of questions here is, one, how do you make sure to remember all the words you've learned? And are there specific tactics that you have that help you memorize and remember words longer term? And how do you balance learning new words with reviewing the older ones that you've studied previously so that you don't forget? Dhruv, let's start with you.
So this revising is actually one of my biggest problems right now. So a lot of the words that I had actually like gotten wrong during the summer bees this year, there's like a whole lot of them actually. Those were words that I've already studied before sometime in the last 3 years, and I've missed them. So that is one of my biggest problems in revision. So revise as much as you have time for in every single day. Make sure you set apart one section of your studying just for revision of previous lists. And I think that's the best strategy you could use.
Awesome. Was there a specific way that you structured that, or do you have like a breakdown, or when do you revise the old words versus or how are you thinking about that as you go forward?
So like try covering a lot of ground in like the first few hours of your studying per day. And then maybe in like the last 1 to 2 hours, set it apart for revision only, and ask your parents to quiz you on words that you've gotten right in the past but might be doubtful for you.
Awesome. Really helpful. What about you, Shraddha? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do have like a similar problem as Dhruv, where I do tend to miss the same words over and over again. So what I would do is I would try to remember the words I've missed by identifying why I got the word wrong, so that I have a reason for why the word is spelled the way it is. So one helpful feature in SpellPundit is there's like a feature called like the starring or like flagging feature. So you can mark words that you have doubts on and that you miss. So I often revisit these words every time I finish a new list. And whenever I learn the new words, I try to relate them together and group them into categories with the old ones so that I don't forget those either.
Yeah, the question was basically, how do you make sure to remember or review the previous words that you've studied versus learning new ones, and how do you strike that balance?
So to review words that I already studied before, I had them like all in a sheet that of words that I was like questionable on, and then every few days I would look over that sheet, and like as I went through, I just removed words that I felt good about, and then to balance that with words that I was like the new words that I was learning, I would say my 8th grade year, it was like 50% review and then 50% like learning new words. So that's just kind of how I balanced it. But if you're younger, it's gonna be more like more new words and then like less review. So it's more about like I guess like what you think is best for you and personalized. But I would say finding a good balance that's right for you is good idea.
Awesome. Yeah. And one of the other thoughts here too is that there's specific things you can do to kind of remember words better. Something that worked for me was actually looking up a picture of the word on Google, or trying to learn something about the definition and just making the word memorable to me, coming up with a sentence or playing a game with it even. And so that's what sort of helped me remember some of the older words I learned as well, is by taking the extra time to kind of learn a little bit more about the word, or dive into it or watch video about it or something. Obviously, you can't do that with every word, but for some of the ones that are harder to memorize, or some of the ones that are like not sticking as well, doing something like that can be a really good investment to make sure you remember that word for the longer term. Awesome. And let's move on to the next question, which is about language patterns. So let's dive deeper specifically into language patterns. So let's start with Surya. So why, I guess we touched on this a little bit, but maybe diving deeper, why is it important for spellers to learn language patterns? And how did you kind of approach learning these different language patterns? Where did you start? And do you have any sort of thoughts on what the most important ones to learn are?
Yeah, so like I was saying, you could like memorize like hundreds of words, but if you know the patterns for that specific language, you're gonna like most likely you're just gonna know the spelling of them just by knowing the patterns. So patterns are really useful because there's only like like let's say like 30 patterns in a language, but that applies to hundreds of words. So that's why it's really important to learn them. Um so uh how I studied them was I learned most of my language patterns through the Words of Wisdom book. I would say that was really useful for learning language patterns. And on top of that, it's just as you see more words from a specific language, you like pick up on those language patterns and you kind of just gain a sort of intuition for those words. So as for example, as you look at more German words, you're gonna pick up on the rules, you're gonna gain like an intuition for German words that you wouldn't have if you haven't looked at them before. Um, I would also say it's um, I guess for what language patterns that you should focus on, I would say um, languages that are languages that are more common or have more words. So I would start with Latin and Greek because they have so many words. Scripps uses those two languages a lot. And then I would move on to French, Spanish, German, and Italian, and a few others that I might be forgetting. But I would say just you should focus on the ones that have more words in them and like the more common languages.
Mhm. Awesome. And can you share an example of a language pattern just to give people some context?
Yeah, so I guess one would be the ch sound in German is spelled TSCH. So if you know that, then you like basically know that like every word with the ch sound in it, you know that it's going to be a TSCH.
Awesome. Okay, really helpful. And yeah, I guess Dave, do you have any additional thoughts on that about how you approach studying language patterns and what were the most important language patterns for you to learn?
Yeah. The most important, like honestly, to be honest, like from sixth grade to seventh grade, that was when I really did the language patterns. It's important to do the language patterns before you really get into the nitty-gritty of spelling because it's kind of like math. Like you can't do algebra 2 if you don't do algebra 1. So yeah, like yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Um, and yeah, I guess to maybe like make that more clear, um, or I guess another question that's coming up for people is, so how do you kind of know when a word is an exception versus adhering to a language pattern? And I guess like, is there some sort of like fundamental of like, is that kind of intuition that you're building over time, or how do you look out for that?
Yeah. Um that's like what I'm trying to emphasize. Like you have to really see these language patterns over and over. And then when you see a word that's probably an exception, you'll know that it's an exception. Like, you know, if like I'd recommend going through CWL. There's practically every language in there, unknown origin, dialectal, Afrikaans, and just sort them out, or also just go through SpellPundit. It doesn't matter. Um, but yeah, you'll just see a lot of like the language patterns and you'll develop that intuition. And when you see an exception, it'll be pretty clear.
Yeah, definitely. I think to add my own thoughts onto this too, it's helpful to have a sort of fundamental foundation of some language patterns. So like, for example, knowing that a lot of words in German have SCH. And as you see more words over time, you also start to kind of notice these patterns as well. That, oh, a lot of words that come from French have, an EE ending, for example, and EE sounds like A. or a lot of words in French have OU for the oo sound. And so you start to see those patterns over time, and you'll understand that you'll gain the intuition, but also SpellPundit and a couple of other places, there's ways to specifically kind of learn and drill those language patterns as well. And SpellPundit has some modules around this that you can explore. And once you've gained that fundamental understanding of these language patterns, you can then kind of see those in every other new word that you study. And it's pretty important to be pretty observant when you're studying. So if you see a word that comes from a certain language, almost asking yourself, what language pattern am I seeing in this word? And piecing that together can be really helpful there too. And then over time, you'll start to see like, oh, this French word has a U for the oo sound instead of OU, but OU is more classic. This is an exception. I'm going to memorize that. And so once you know the language patterns, you can pick out what the exceptions are because it doesn't adhere to what is the pattern for that language. And then those words you can memorize. And so that's what's worked for me. And that's what's helped a lot of spellers that we've coached through SpellPundit as well. Great. Let's move on. Specifically, I think two languages that people get pretty tripped up on are French and German. And so we had a lot of people ask us about how do you crack French and German words and what tips do you have? Shraddha, do you have any thoughts on that?
Right. Okay. So for French and German words, I feel like the language rules for each language that was in Words of Wisdom, they've helped me immensely because these languages are spelled very differently from English. So even if you get a word on stage that you don't know, these language rules will be able to help you. But as my other spellers mentioned, there are some words that don't follow the rules in these languages. So being able to identify those words and learning them separately will also help you on stage in case you get a word that you don't know.
Okay. And was there a specific way that you kind of learned those language patterns?
I feel like, so for in Words of Wisdom, the book is divided into sections depending on the language. So I would look at that language, and for each sound, there would be a certain explanation for that sound. So I would use that to be able to relate those to words in the languages.
Great. Perfect. And Dhruv, do you have any thoughts on this as well? How you cracked French and German and what tips helped you?
Yeah, I do. So for German is a very consistent language when it comes to rules and roots. So if you know the language rules and the roots of the language, you have a very easy time with German. And also, German sticks out to the viewer. German has very eye-catching words as per every language rule that they have. And because of that, on stage, you would know if a word is German and what rules it contains if you study those language rules for German. And French, on the other hand, I don't generally like French actually, because French has many endings very immensely tricky to work with. So make sure you memorize most of the French endings and make sure you remember like each gender in French for nouns, like masculine and feminine, and you'll be fine with French if you do that.
Awesome. Super helpful. Okay, that's great. And let's move on from language patterns into roots. So roots are also this other piece that can be a building block for different words. And roots are much more common in languages like Latin and Greek. If you're a little bit more of an advanced speller, you might learn some roots for other words like German or some other languages like German. But most people start with Latin and Greek roots. And so maybe let's talk about why is it important to learn roots and how do you start learning them? Charlotte, do you want to take a stab at that?
So roots are really important for spellers to learn. They're kind of like something to fall back on if you don't know a word immediately. So I started studying roots by using Words of Wisdom. My coach, Cole Schaefer-Ray, also provided really good resources for me to learn roots. I think it's good to start by learning Latin and Greek roots because they're more common and show up in words more frequently.
Okay, great. And what about you, Surya? So how did you go about, I guess, starting to learn roots, and how did you build the muscle of being able to notice on stage when you were given a word with a certain root? Like, what are you looking for? What kind of information are you asking for on stage?
Yeah, so I started learning roots just by looking at words in unabridged, and I saw that they had roots in the origin, and then um kind of what I did was just I saw those roots, and then I used the advanced search feature to put them to search for all the words with those roots in it. And that's kind of how I studied. I put like all the roots that I saw in a sheet, like all the useful roots. So I would say like only study roots that have like more than like 10-ish words, because any less, and I don't know if they're like super useful. But yeah, and then I just kept on looking at more roots through words that I looked up in unabridged. And then the way that you can sort of ask roots on stage is, or how you can tell if a word has a root is, one way is through the definition. So based on the definition of the word, that can give you clues as to what roots are there. So and also you can tell by the just by the word itself. So if it sounds like there's a root that you know in it, just you should ask the root to make sure. Like let's say, for example, if you got the word bibliophile, it's like somebody that likes books. So it would say that in the definition, and biblio means book. So that's how you would know.
Awesome. Okay. And lastly, Pranav, do you want to chime in? How did you start learning roots, and how do you kind of identify them, or how do you identify that a word has a root when you're on stage?
Well, I learned roots using words of wisdom. There's a root section which it's in alphabetical order. So I would, depending on how many roots are in each letter section, I would try to finish at least one per day, and then I would revise them until I was 100% thorough with all the roots. And do you just want to you want to understand that um figuring out that roots are in a word just comes with practice. So the more words you spell, the more you'll just start to pick up that there's roots in these words.
Got it. Yeah, perfect. And one of the questions that's coming up in the chat actually is, how do you ask for roots when you're on stage? And what do the different answers that judges can give you, like what do those mean? Whether they say yes or you're on the right track, how is that different? No worries. Yeah, the question is basically, how do you ask about roots when you're on stage, and what do the different judges' answers mean? If they say if they say yes, that's correct. If they say that you're on the right track, how do you interpret that?
Yeah, so you ask for a word, you ask, does this word contain the root with the root which, and you have to say the language and the meaning. And if the judges say yes, that means it's in the word somewhere. That's up to you to interpret. And if they say, I don't see that here, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not in the word, but it's literally not given in the dictionary. So it could possibly be in the word, or the word could be spelled that way, but the judges just don't see that in the dictionary. So there's no
Yeah.
really cut and clear answer that it's no. It's usually they say, I don't see that here. Unless you just don't give the proper information, then they'll say no.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good answer. So the way that you can ask is, as Pranav said, you should give the root, you should give the definition of that root and the meaning of that root. And if a judge says yes, then you're probably good. You've probably given all the right information and it's explicitly shown in the dictionary. And if they say that you're on the right track, then you kind of have to play, or you have to kind of use your best guess to guess whether you're thinking about the right root and maybe gave an incorrect piece of information, or whether the root is in the word, but maybe the dictionary doesn't explicitly say it, as Pranav says. So that's kind of how you can think about interpreting those answers. And then I think there's a lot of questions in the chat about how do you start learning roots. And I think there's two kind of important pieces to this, and I'll kind of summarize what everyone has said. One is about actually drilling the roots. And so there's a couple of different resources you can use there, both with SpellPundit, there's some roots platforms, but also Words of Wisdom and a couple of other tools. And so, and then at least for SpellPundit, the way that we've created it is that we start with the roots that are most simple and most common, and work it up by difficulty. So that can be a really good way for younger spellers to start. starting to get roots. But the second part that's just as important is then being able to identify as you study other words that this root is in this word, and kind of watching for that and being able to kind of see those patterns. And that learning that pattern recognition really well over time is what will really serve you in the B, so that when you get a word on stage and you want to kind of piece it together based off of roots, you can actually make those really educated guesses and notice those patterns. So that's kind of the two parts about learning roots. And the same thing applies for language patterns as well, is learning the actual language patterns and drilling them, but also being able to identify them in words is a muscle to build too. Cool. Really helpful. Let's move on to homonyms. So homonyms can be really confusing, and just to define that for people, these are words that sound the same but have different definitions. So one example is blue, B-L-U-E is the color, versus B-L-E-W, which is like blowing air. And they sound the same on stage, and so you will have to kind of ask the definition and know what spelling matches with what definition to be able to get that word correctly. So let's have you all talk on why is it important to learn homonyms, and how do you go about distinguishing them and remembering what word is what. Dhruv, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So homonyms, they are very tricky, but it boils down to just going back to the roots. So homonyms, they will have different roots. Sometimes homonyms might be from completely different etymologies and languages, but other times they can be very minor alterations. For alterations, just memorize the word. That's the only thing you could do for those. But then for words that have completely different etymology as homonyms, you just go back to the roots and hope you figure it out.
Okay, great. What about Vikrant? Do you have any thoughts on this? How do you distinguish between homonyms?
So basically, once you learn the definition, don't memorize it word for word, but make it so that you can recognize that word in all situations. Basically, you have to own the word, like make it yours. You can use it in your English essay or maybe in your debate club. That word can be used. So own it, and then you'll know the word.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Although I highly doubt you'll be able to use like the word fisharmonica in a seventh grade English essay. I recommend finding, a mnemonic for every word. So for example, I don't know. So okay, like bracero, Bracero and Brasero. Brasero, the one with an S, is a type of stove. So Brasero, like S for stove. That's what I did.
Yeah, that's a good tip. That's a good tip. It's kind of whatever sticks with you. So I mean, what I would do also is kind of the exact same thing, is look up both words in the dictionary and kind of create for myself what is a pattern to distinguish these words, and what's a way that I'm going to remember it. And so and the process of kind of making that for yourself and like figuring out what's the best way to remember this is also going to help you actually remember the difference between those homonyms as well. But yeah, that sounds great. Awesome. Let's kind of jump to the next question here. So another section of the spelling bee is around vocabulary, and that was started a couple of years ago, or I guess it was started when I was a speller, was the vocabulary sections of the spelling bees. And it's become a bigger part of the bee over the last few years as well. So curious to hear how you all prepare for vocabulary and what resources have helped you the most. So let's start with Shraddha here.
So for vocabulary, I feel like some words in vocabulary are built on roots. So like Surya mentioned, bibliophile, you can figure out the definition based on roots. So I feel like studying roots is helpful for those kinds of words. But I feel like the major resource for vocabulary would be CWL, because apart from being a good platform for starting spelling, it would be a very good platform for starting vocabulary as well. And then in Words of Wisdom, which is Scott Reamer's book, there is a section for vocabulary quizzes. So I feel like if you start with those two resources, you should be good.
So a really good book that I noticed a lot of words this year in Scripps as word meaning questions came from this book. It's called Vocab Prep for Spelling Bees by J.H. Dunn. I can actually put the link in there. So these words, they're giving in a multiple choice test format. in the book, so that's a really good way to quiz yourself on those.
Awesome, awesome. And Dave, anything to add here?
Yeah, so honestly, like vocabulary, I like to analogize vocabulary with learning a language. Just because you go through a list of words in Spanish and you take a Spanish class at school, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be fluent in the language. You actually have to, I don't know, what would be more what would be more efficient is actually going to a Spanish speaking country because you're going to be immersed and the language is going to be all around you. So similarly to vocabulary, you have to immerse yourself in roots. You have to read a lot, and you have to constantly be doing it. Like you can't learn a language just by doing it 30 minutes every 4 days. You have to do it 30 to 1 hour, 30 minutes to 1 hour every day. That's what I did.
Yeah, that's super great. And one thing that I found really helpful for myself too was when I was reviewing older words, sort of combining that with vocabulary as well. Roots can also be really helpful for vocabulary because to learn a root, you have to learn the definition of that. And sometimes if you see a word, you can kind of backtrack your way to the definition if you can guess what the roots are, or if you can see what the roots are. But also I would learn the definitions of a lot of words that I studied because that also helped the spelling stick in my mind as well. And so those two things can be really intertwined. And so for some of the words that are especially like level 1, level 2 in SpellPundit, memorizing the definitions as you learn those words can help you remember both the spelling and the vocabulary better. And those two things are intertwined. It's also much more helpful for like longer term when you're done with the spelling bee and you're in high school and college, and having really good vocabulary is really, really helpful. So I would say my only thing to add to what everyone has said, which is great advice, is learn the vocabulary or learn the definitions of words as you learn their spelling as well, and it will kind of help both stick in your mind better.
For vocabulary, I
Perfect.
also wanted to add one more resource. So everyone remember to study word of the day because it's just one word a day, right? Like when you get the word of the day email, just look at it. It really helps improve your vocabulary.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
like add on to that, it would make sense, right? Because Merriam-Webster is the dictionary of the spelling bee. So, like, why wouldn't you want to go through the word of the day? And I see this constantly, like every year, like at least 5 to 6 words of the days end up becoming like vocab questions. So you should do it. Yeah, like sign
Yeah.
up to the newsletter. There's a newsletter.
Yeah, this is the newsletter on Merriam-Webster. So you can just put in your email, get that word every once a day, or even just log on to the dictionary website once a day and just see it. That's a good tip. Thank you both.
Just to do
Great.
that,
Go
another
ahead.
add-on for studying vocab, don't so for word of the day, you should study that, but in conjunction with that, Merriam-Webster also has a very interesting vocab quiz. It's called How Strong is Your Vocabulary? And that usually gives common words, but words that do have a high chance of appearing in Scripps rounds 2 through 5 for vocab. So that is also a really good thing to help with vocab prep.
Oh yeah, and also one more thing. I know, I'm sorry.
You're
But
good.
one of the best vocab books, actually the best vocab book, is Defining Success by Navneet Morley. Why do I say this? Because I've never seen a vocabulary resource that actually asks questions the way like Scripps does. So, the Merriam-Webster vocab quizzes are great, but like all it does is it gives you the word and just like 5 answer options or 4 answer options. What Defining Success does is it actually gives you a vocab question and you have to actually think a little bit and not just parrot out the definition. So that's why Defining Success by Navneet Morley is really good.
Yeah, for sure. And as a plug, Navneet was a 2020 SpellPundit National Spelling Bee champion. So we're big fans of him. Cool. All right. Super helpful. Really good overview of vocabulary. And one more thing just to add is what Dave said is taking the Scripps National Spelling Bee will have practice tests as well, especially once you get to the National Spelling Bee, they'll give you access to former practice or former written tests where you can practice vocabulary, and Scripps does have a specific way of asking vocabulary questions, and sometimes their answer choices will be intentionally tricky or will sort of target words that you might confuse the word being asked with. And so just drilling a bunch of those practice questions and kind of getting a sense and intuition for how Scripps asks questions, which is pretty unique, is also really helpful as well. All right, cool. So I think that will wrap up vocabulary for us. And for the last question in discussing preparation tips, so everyone as a speller has particular strengths, particular weaknesses, and it's just as good or just as important to get better at your strengths as it is to get better at your weaknesses. And so curious how you all kind of identified what your weakness was, what was your strategy to tackle it, and were there specific things that you did, like maintaining a list of words you got wrong, or any other things that you did to help address those weaknesses? So Charlotte, do you want to take a stab at that question?
Okay. So my strategy to tackle my weaknesses was I did maintain a list of words that I got wrong, and I think that it's important to review whatever words you've missed really extensively. An exercise that I did was I would write down the words that I missed, and then I would write down like some kind of defining information about them, so it would help me remember like why I missed them and how they're actually spelled and what they mean. I think it's really important to do that because studying words that you missed is really helpful.
Awesome. All right. What about you, Surya? What was your strategy to tackle your weaknesses, and how did you go about restudying words that you got wrong?
To tackle my weaknesses, I just for what I did, I just advanced searched those. So like something I was really bad at was Italian words. So I went to Unabridged and put that in I searched for all the words with Italian in the origin, and I learned those. So that's kind of what I did to tackle weaknesses. And for the words that I missed, I have a really big sheet of all the words I missed, and like every day I would spend like maybe like 30 minutes to an hour just going over those and looking at the information in the dictionary and just trying to remember or like creating like a mnemonic or a way that I can remember it better. So just the words that you find tricky, I just like looked at them, and the more you look at a word, you just learn it better. So that's just kind of what I did.
Yeah, awesome. And one of the things that I used to do actually is if I misspelled a word over and over and over again, what I would do is write it on a sticky note and put it around my house. So I had a bunch of words on my bathroom mirror, which were just like sticky notes of words that I kept misspelling over and over again. It was like the first thing I saw while I was brushing my teeth is like, that's what I would look at. Or I'd put them like kind of in like binders, and I would see them when I was at school. And kind of incorporating words in random places was really helpful to kind of keep sticking the words or keep having continuous visualizations of the words in front of me, and therefore over time it kind of stuck in my mind. But as both Surya and Charlotte said too, I think it's also pretty important to go into the dictionary, read up on the word, find a picture of it, whatever, but create some way to help you memorize it, and also maybe identify why you're misspelling it. Like if you're confusing it with a similar word, if you're misspelling it because you're using the wrong language pattern or the wrong root. Sometimes going back to the root cause of why you misspelled that word can help you then kind of troubleshoot and make sure to not make that same mistake in your thought pattern the next time you see that word. So great. Okay. Thank you all. Those were really, really great and helpful answers to the preparation. Yeah. Anything else to add? Go for it.
So for working on words, like to try to revise them, just like you said, Shobha, for words like pertaining to like putting things on random places, that just to kind of get a second look at them. Another thing that I usually do is for genus names or like words relating to plants or animals, genus names. I just do a quick Google search and then try to visualize the plant or animal that I see.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Googling the words and reading about them. A lot of these words have like really cool Wikipedia articles too. And just, getting excited about the word and what it means and like where it fits into the world is always it can be really fun, and it can also make spelling interesting to you too, because you're sort of learning about the world as you learn new words too. And yeah, fun fact, I actually wrote my college essay about that process. So it's a really fun thing to do. Okay, wonderful. I'll just really quickly, any of panelists, are there last preparation tips about anything? Roots, language patterns, homonyms, vocab? Any last thoughts to add as we close up this section?
Yeah. Could I add something?
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay, so spelling bee preparation is a marathon, but what's also true about marathons is you want to go the fastest at the end of the marathon, right? So save your energy at the beginning. So during the summer, I'd recommend doing 5 to 6 hours. Like, why wouldn't you do that? Like, there's no school. You might as well take advantage of that. Like, if you're like a seventh or eighth grader, if you're like a third grader, you probably shouldn't do that. But if you're a seventh grader or sixth grader, you should probably do that. But then as we get into school days, 3 to 4 hours is ideal. Weekends, of course, 5 to 6 hours. Like, there's no school, so you should probably take advantage of that. And like, honestly, the reality for me was 4 months, like the 4 months leading up to the B, like if it's your last year, like I feel like the motivation just comes within. And a lot of people just say that studying 10 hours is unrealistic. But the reality is, like in today's era of spelling bee, if you want to win, you probably have to do 10 hours, like 3 months leading up to the B. Not for an entire year, but that's the reality. Like, Zaila Avant-Garde said that she did 13,000 words a day. I highly doubt that took 5 hours a day. That's probably more than 5 hours. So that's my like final thing.
Yeah, perfect. And just to add to that too, I think there's a lot of questions coming up in the chat about, I guess, still balancing spelling with a lot of other commitments. And I think like probably for all of you, I'm curious to see if anyone has thoughts on this, but there were things you probably had to say no to kind of invest more time in spelling. The frank reality is that this does take up a lot of time. And if you want to get really, really good at it and you have that drive, it is not just about being more efficient with your time. That can help you, and that's something you should do, but it's also about choosing to focus on spelling and actually saying no to maybe some other extracurriculars that you had in order to be able to kind of commit more time to this. And so if that's something you want to do, choosing to dedicate more time to spelling can be really, really important. And I think that's a general principle for life after the spelling bee too, both in high school and college, is it's just as important what you say yes to as it is what you say no to, in order to make time and space to be able to focus on something really deeply and commit to it. So great. Anything final to add? That was awesome, Dave.
I think in terms of preparation, I'll just say this, that the like best, I think, or at least for me, the best way to study, or the best resource I've ever used, was the dictionary directly, the Merriam-Webster unabridged. Like I think for me it was just super useful doing the advanced search, just being able to look at different languages of origin and different categories of words, and like doing definition searches. And I would make lists of those, and that's like the main way I studied. So I would like make lists of all the words that had to do with like I would make lists of all the words that are like fishes or birds or like cakes. So that's the main thing I did, just making lists and looking at different categories and languages of origin using advanced search.
Yeah, I 100% agree. But could I like add one more thing?
Go for it.
Okay. Right, so just adding to what I said before, like you don't have to drastically cut down all of your extracurriculars. Like, you know, okay, to be honest, like I didn't even go to school like for the 3 months leading up to the B. Like my mom's a doctor, right? So she would just write some like fake notes saying that like I had a stomach ache, like pretty much all the time. So yeah, like if you have a parent that's a doctor, you should do that. I'd recommend that. Of course, don't like fall behind in your classes, but like, it's like eighth grade. Like, let's be real. Like, it's not like a college class level. So, um, but yeah, like you shouldn't cut down all of your extracurriculars. Like in the summer of 2022, the summer before the spelling bee, I was playing tennis 7 hours a week. But 1 month leading up to the bee, I was just doing 2 hours. It doesn't have to be drastic, but like, you still have to cut down a little bit. It's a national competition. Like, it's competitive. You're gonna have to do things that other kids don't.
Yeah. I think people are often surprised also by like how accommodating schools will be too. Like my school when I was in eighth grade, like was like, yeah, fine, you can like skip the week before the national spelling bee. That's totally fine. Like what you're doing is more important. So yeah, but if it's important to you, you'll make time for it. And that's kind of the, I think, underlying message between what we're all trying to say. Great. Okay. Let's move on to section 3. These are all really fantastic tips. Thank you all. So this one will be a somewhat quicker section, but a couple questions from a lot of people about whether or not you all used coaches, and do people need coaches? When do they need coaches? How are coaches useful? So a couple different questions there, but yeah, let's kick off. Maybe Charlotte, do you want to start there?
Yeah, so I think that not every speller necessarily needs a coach. There are so many successful spellers who have like self-studied their way to the top rankings of the National Spelling Bee. I personally had a coach because I realized that my method of self-studying wasn't really working for me. There's lots of resources that coaches can provide if you feel that it's right for you, but it's not necessarily right for everybody. Coaching with my coach, Cole Schaefer-Ray, was an amazing experience, and I do recommend it to anyone who thinks that it's right for them.
Awesome. And just to dive into that, what were the specific things that your coach helped you with, and what were, I guess, like, what were you doing in your coaching sessions versus outside of your coaching sessions?
So, my coach definitely helped me with basically every aspect of the beat. His resources are amazing. During class, we would review words I had trouble with. He's very organized, which really helped me because I'm very disorganized. And he would tell me, or like help me make a plan for studying, and it would really help me study more effectively and be more successful. His name is Cole Schaefer-Ray.
All right, perfect. And what about you, Surya? Thoughts on coaching and whether or not you used a coach?
I think to be successful at spelling, you don't need a coach. It's more about just if you can motivate yourself and if you can study. For me, I did use a coach. Grace Walters was my coach, and I think she really helped me. She like just the quizzing and learning language patterns and roots from her was really helpful, but also just having somebody like that on your side that's like motivating you and like just like sticking with you is also like just and like motivating you is also really helpful.
Perfect. And what about you? How did you kind of use your coaching sessions? What were you doing with coaching or during your classes, and what were you doing kind of outside?
Yeah, during my classes, it was usually quizzing on like a particular topic or the words that I studied the week prior. Outside of coaching sessions, my coach would give me lists to go over, like category lists, like plants or like rodents, just random things like that.
Awesome. Yeah. Super cool. Super cool. Very helpful. And I think one more thing to add too is that a lot of the value sometimes of a coach can be sort of the structure and discipline that creates around a study plan and having a study plan that you stick to. That can be super helpful. But I would also say that that's something that parents can actually help a lot with as well. And coaching is really useful for some of the, I think, more intensive like language card prep or language pattern preparation and study plans to some extent, but especially if you're a younger speller and especially if coaching can be really expensive, and I think is probably most suited to spellers who are really, really serious about getting to the highest levels of the National B. But what we say a lot is that parents can also help kind of create plans for your kids. And my parents did that a lot for me. So there's ways that parents can kind of step in and be really supportive and take over some of the role of a coach as well. So, all right. And yeah, lastly, let's have Dave, if you have any thoughts on coaching and how you used it, how it was helpful to you.
Yeah. Well, so my coach was Scott Reamer, but also when I was young, like 6th grade, 5th grade, my coach was Ananya Vinay. But yeah, like I 100% agree. The parents are a big factor, but also you know, like my dad says that teach the kid to fish, but just don't give the kid the fish like directly. Teach the kid to get the fish itself, like actually fish. So like to a certain extent, you're gonna have to learn to be self-efficient, and you don't always have to do what your coach tells you to. Like I know that sounds counterintuitive, but like sometimes my parents and coaches would tell me something and I just feel like that was just a waste of time, you know? So like I'm just being honest, that's like what I did. So you have to like use your own like gut, you know?
Definitely. Yeah. So yeah, coaches are kind of another tool in the toolbox. I think is how I've always thought about it as well. So that's a good thought there. Cool. Does anyone else have anything to add about coaching that we haven't covered yet?
I was just gonna add that so of course some people might need a coach because you know, you might not know how to plan properly and everything, but I use spelling as a personal project, which also made me like have my own independence on it. So it just depends on the person if you need a coach or not.
Okay, great. All right, let's move to our last section then. And this is about being on the stage at the B. So let's start with our first question here is sometimes you'll be on stage and you'll get a word that you've never seen before, and that can be super scary. How do you manage your nerves and how do you approach figuring out what the right spelling of that word is? Shraddha, do you want to kick us off?
Okay, sure. So when you get a word you don't know during a B, the first thing I would say is try to stay calm and don't panic, because it's much easier to try and get a word correct if you have a clear mind. So once you've mostly like digested that you've gotten a word that you don't know, you should first like try to recollect any words that either like sound similar to it or are from the same language of origin as that word. But if say like the word is unknown origin, or you have absolutely no idea, then I would try to rely on intuition. I mean, sometimes that doesn't work, and I have gotten out many times trying to do that, but I do feel like at least it will give you like a chance to get the word correct.
Great. Dhruv, what are your thoughts?
All right. So if you've seen like if you've never seen a word and you get that in a B, like Shraddha said, don't panic. Okay, that's the worst thing you want to do. A guy fainted at the 2004 spelling bee. Don't attempt that. All right. So I'm not sure if I have the best strategy for that actually. But Aryan Kedkar, he had a very interesting strategy for that. He would go on asking roots, no matter if he got a yes or a no answer, and that would really help him get a proper grip on the word, and that might also help you visualize the word that you've never seen before.
Okay, awesome. Yes. And I think really important what both of you have said so far is, don't panic. It's, a mental game. And I have definitely gotten out on words because I didn't recognize it and then, sort of had a little mental panic and wasn't thinking clearly. And so I think a lot of it is definitely keeping your cool. All right. And let's maybe get a few more perspectives on this. So Surya, do you want to add any thoughts on this?
You say the question again. Sorry.
Oh, just how do you approach words that you've never seen before when you're on stage?
Okay. Yeah, words I've never seen before, the first thing my mind went to was the language of origin. So if there was any patterns from that I could use. And usually there were like just based on the language of origin, you get a specific like I would say like a specific intuition of the word just based on the language of origin. Or you could use roots like last year my first word in the finals, I didn't know it at all, but with roots, I was able to break it down and get it right. So yeah, just if you've never seen it before, just using the language of origin, using the roots, seeing if anything in the definition can help you. So yeah, just it's mainly about intuition and using those clues that they give you to make a good educated guess.
Perfect. Yeah. And yeah, just to double click on something Surya said, this is also why it's really important to learn roots and language patterns, not just because they help you learn words faster, but because they can help you guess words you've never seen before. So if you get a word that's German, you'll know how to spell it in certain ways if you know German language patterns, and you can increase your chances of getting it right. And often, to be a really good speller, you have to kind of learn, not just memorize a lot of words, but like really deeply understand how language works. Like you're basically becoming a linguist yourself. And so that's why it is super important to learn roots and language patterns, is because you can increase your chances of getting a word right just by a cold guess. All right, then let's do this next question when you're on stage. This one's a question that's come up a lot, so we'll get a couple of different perspectives on this, but spelling can be super stressful, especially when you're at the National Spelling Bee and you're on ESPN, or I guess different channels now. It was ESPN back in my time, but when you're on different channels, there's cameras in your face, lots of photographers, there's a lot going on all the time. How do you all stay focused and manage your stress during the bee? Dhruv, do you want to start off?
So, wait, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, it's just how do you stay focused and manage your stress during a bee?
Okay. So, for me, what I basically did is I just tried to do this technique called box breathing. So I just took deep breaths for just for a sequence. So I took deep breaths every time I got a word, no matter if it's a word I knew. And I always went slow with my spelling. I would never take it fast. So I would always ask the necessary root question, ask all the questions 2 to 3 times individually. That's what I usually do, individual questions, more than actually asking the judges for all the information. I don't think that's exactly the best strategy, because I like to hear all the information in depth. So that's basically what I did during bees to help manage my stress, just to validate the fact that I either knew the word or I could get it through roots.
Awesome. Okay. What about you, Pranav? Thoughts on this?
So for me, managing stress, like usually when I'm up at the mic, I'll just be staring out into the audience. Like I'm not looking at anyone really. Whenever I get the word, I instantly try to visualize it in my head, and I instantly ask for information so I can have as much time as possible to sort of apply any roots or rules that I know, and I try to see if there's any roots in the word. So I just try to keep my mind off of like the audience and just like the stress in general. I'm just trying to focus on just the word. And when you're sitting down waiting for the rounds to end, there's gonna be nerves. You just have to like sit through it, really. I just sat through it.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of nerves that can build up when you're not actually the one spelling. And so different people have different tactics on this, where I would often not pay attention to anyone else's word because I knew that would stress me out. But different people kind of have different focuses on that. So yeah. Dhruv, do you want to add something?
Yeah. So God, I muted myself. All right. So just like what Pranav said, like just sitting through the rest of the round. I mean, like, I feel like that's a good strategy to employ, but then I feel like you shouldn't pay too much to the attention of the other words in a round, because they might trip you up with a future round, because you might be thinking of something else. And I feel like you shouldn't let your mind wander. You should have like a more of a focus on the next word you're gonna receive. So I have a feeling just like not pay attention to the other words that are asked in the round, because some of them you might not know the spelling, and then you might get even more stressed. So don't try it.
Yeah, I agree. And just like on a different note, like managing stress, right? Like work hard, but also play hard. Okay. Like during B week, I did not even study, or I did study a little bit, but I didn't study at all. Okay. Like I literally carried a blue stuffed animal with me the entire B week. I went to Chipotle with like two or three of the finalists right now. Like, work hard, but also play hard. Like B week is a magical experience. And at the end of the day, like you're probably not gonna get that experience again. So, like while I did say that I did 8 to 10 hours, like 3 months leading up to the B, I didn't do that for an entire year, just 3 months. Like I also took breaks during those months. Like every 2 weeks, I would just take a day for myself where I don't know, like I ate ice cream and caught up on Netflix. And like I would just like, I don't know, like hug Becky, okay? So work hard, play hard.
Mhm. And I will also say I'm old, but like I stopped spelling in 2015, so about yeah, like 8 years ago. And I think the things that I remember and care about the most is like all of the all of the fun memories during B week and all of the friends I made. And I'm really close with like still a lot of people that I spelled with. And so I think that's definitely a point, is kind of the perspective of what's going to matter during the B, or what you care about during B week is not what you're going to care about eight years after B week. And so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. But yeah, Shraddha, anything to add there as well on managing your stress?
Okay. So during a B, I would also recommend, like, if you're feeling stressful, or like if you're feeling stressed, then you should take deep breaths and remember that like you got all the way here. So in the end, there's not really much to worry about. You've already studied everything that you could. And just like Pranav said, like if you get like a word you don't know, or you're starting to be stressed, I think not focusing on like the audience would really help. Like maybe focusing on the pronouncer or at the ceiling. And if there are like, and sometimes what I feel is I get stressed when somebody gets out, or if I get word that I don't know. So I think like the most important thing is to just focus on like your word and when your turn in the round is gonna come.
Awesome. Yes, definitely. I think finding ways to kind of focus on other things or hyper focus on the pronouncer is really, really helpful to not get distracted. Okay. And last person, Vikrant, do you want to add any last thoughts to this?
So, personally, in a spelling bee, just think of it as one of your own practice sessions. So when you hear a word, think that you're at home listening to someone quizzing in, then just spell it, thinking you're still at home.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of forgetting the environment is, I think, a common theme of what you all are saying. So perfect. Okay. Final thoughts on this question. I know it's something that a lot of
Yeah,
people care about. Go ahead.
yeah. Okay, so managing stress, my biggest tip is for the parents. I'm saying this on behalf of my parents. I'm so grateful I had supportive parents that didn't add on stress to me. Um, do not compare your kids to other spellers. That's the worst thing that could happen, especially if that speller just so happens to be the speller's sibling. Okay, that's the worst thing that could happen. Um, like don't just like go to your kid and just say Dev studied 10 hours, so you should go study 10 hours. And don't say that to a second grader, please. Like, yes, I did study 10 hours, but at the end of the day, it did not feel like studying 10 hours. Like I genuinely loved it. And I was just doing what I love for 10 hours. And that was only for like 3 months before the B. And then after that, I just relaxed. It was worth it. That's my tip. So for the parents.
Awesome. Great. All right. And last question we have, and we're going to get everyone's thoughts on this, since I think this is really important, but and I also have a lot of thoughts on this, but you all committed a lot of time to the spelling bee. And I think a lot of people are curious, especially the people who are kind of getting and starting off on this journey, is what is the value you've seen in it? What has been the benefit to you of participating in spelling bees? And what are the ways that you think about them helping you as you kind of all go into high school and go into college? So we're going to have everyone answer this question. So maybe let's start. Pranav, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so for me, a lot of value comes from now that I'm in high school, and especially with the increased workload that comes from the transition from middle school to high school. You're able to really manage your time and you're not failing when you're trying to complete 4 or 5 assignments in one day because you're used to spending a lot of time studying. And also, it really helps with writing essays. I had to write 3 essays for summer work in school, and I was able to really use vocabulary that I learned from spelling, and this will help all through high school and college. You're already accustomed to spending long amounts of time studying, so what everyone else is really working hard for, it should be light work for you.
Yeah, definitely. You're just redirecting the focus out of spelling and into other things. So 100%. Dhruv, what are your thoughts?
So I think spelling has I feel like ever since I started spelling in kindergarten, I've always done it as something for fun. Because ever since I learned how to read, I always had this kind of affinity with language patterns. So I noticed when I started spelling seriously in 4th grade, actually not in 4th grade, maybe like 5th grade actually, end of 5th grade, when I started spelling seriously, I felt like it actually had some kind of value to my life that I didn't see before that. And I felt like Pranav said, spelling will help you in academics, of course. Spelling, I feel like for that reason, is a field where all fields of science, math, and English are studied equally, because if I were to look at a genus name, I might get a connection to some of my science knowledge. If I were to look at a word like Jacobean or Jacobian, I mean, that's the wrong homonym, Jacobian, I would make a connection to math. For the word Wrightsianum, I might make a connection to poetry. So I feel like spelling is a universal subject. It could be used in all areas, and it will help you learn many things in all areas.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a really, really good thought. All right. What about you, Vikrant?
So, I've said this a lot before, but I've always said that spelling bees are like a metaphor for life. So in a spelling bee, you don't know what word you're gonna get, just like in life. You don't know what like situation you're gonna receive. But you need to know what you know about like language rules and roots and everything to figure out the spelling of the word if you don't know it. Just like in life, you need to use the set in circumstances that you have to figure out the situation. So I think spelling bees give you a lot of experience in a lot of disciplines, so it really helps you and benefits you in the future.
Definitely. Yeah. Good, good. I like the metaphor for life as well. What about you, Surya? What are your thoughts?
Um, so yeah, I think the benefit to spelling is one thing I would say is like Pranav said, time management, and just like being able to like manage your workload more efficiently. Just because, and it's like you'll have an easier time studying for things just because you're studying for spelling. So I think that's one area it could benefit you. Um, I think another thing with spelling that was just that I guess like benefited me was just like I had fun doing it. It was just really fun. So that's just why I got to spelling. It was fun for me. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a good message there of it is very hard and it doesn't usually work if parents push their kids to become good at spelling bees because the parent wants it. It kind of has, as you can see, everyone here, all of us included, just genuinely love nerding out about words. And we're doing that even before we did the spelling bee. And so I think that's a really good point, Surya, is that the best spellers are the ones who genuinely enjoy it. And if you don't genuinely enjoy it, don't do it. There's a lot of other things in the world that you can get really good at. Math, science, art, whatever, music, anything. And so I think that's a really good point there, Surya. What about you, Shraddha? How has the spelling bee helped you?
So spelling has helped me in like multiple ways. I mean, the first thing that it's done is it has helped me improve my vocabulary. So if I'm reading a book or writing an essay, I feel like I can comprehend much better than if I hadn't done spelling. So I don't have to like go and look up words in the dictionary while I'm reading a book. I can understand it with my own knowledge. I also feel like it helps me manage time effectively because with spelling, I do need to balance school and extracurriculars and spelling. So I feel like it also helps me like keep organized. But most of all, I think it's helped me make connections and friends because the people I've met in the spelling community are so much more different than like any other people I've met. So I feel like they're the ones that like can nerd out with me for words. So I feel like they've really helped me build like a whole new friend community.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've graduated college and I'm still really, really close with a lot of spelling bee friends. So 100% agree. The friends are very lifelong. It's a really, really tight-knit community. Awesome. Charlotte, what about you?
I really agree with what everyone's saying about time management. Like, spelling has helped me with my work ethic. Like, I know that my persistence pays off, basically. I also think that another really important thing that Scripps has given me is all of these connections. Like Shraddha said, I've made some really good friends from spelling, and even if we're not spelling anymore, I still talk to them all the time. And I think just the experience of being at Scripps, it's a wonderful experience. And unlike other things I've done in my life, I know that I'm gonna remember how it felt to be at B Week for the rest of my life.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. +1 on the friends point. And yeah, let's close off with Dave. How has the spelling bee helped you?
Yeah, it's helped me so much. Like, a just quick, brief rundown of my journey. 2019, 51st at Scripps. 2020, it was canceled. 2021, I got out in the third round of Scripps. 2022, I didn't even make it to Scripps. 2023, like 1 month before Scripps, I got out in the SpellPundit B second round of semifinals. So after all of that, I still plowed through because of my love with words. And I think you really learn determination. And you do get a work ethic. You learn how to prioritize your stuff. You learn how to manage yourself on stage, and you learn how to perform on stage. That's very important with interviews, right? Presentations for school and your job. And you also, like everyone else is saying, you get a vocabulary. You can read higher level text. You can write better essays. Yeah. Yeah. And you learn how to have fun with something. Like, the spelling bee is very unique. Like, you make friends, and that's something that you don't get out of a lot of other competitions. Like, no offense to the other competitions, but like with a spelling bee, literally 3 hours before the finals, the grand finals, we all ate together and had lunch. What other competition does that? So the amount of friendships you make, it's amazing. And like, I truly love spelling and the spelling bee. I don't regret anything. I don't regret anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think one thing that is ChatGPT, one thing that is really helpful, or one thing that's really nice about what you said is there was a lot of ups and downs, right? Like some years you did better than others, and some years you did worse than you did the previous year. And so I think, and Charlotte had said this too, that skill of kind of persisting even after you've experienced a failure, is a really important one, both for the spelling bee itself, but also for like everything you're going to do for the next, 60 plus years that you'll be doing things in your career. So that's awesome. And yeah, I think the last thing just here is I will kind of summarize thoughts as well. I've been a little bit further out of the spelling bee than you all. And so I think just to consolidate some of the thoughts that you all said, I think there's a lot of actual like hard skills that you learn, right? Like you learn more words, you have a larger vocabulary, you're a better communicator. And parents, I'm sure you can all see this. All of our panelists are sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth graders and are very, very good at communicating. And that's something that the spelling bee teaches you really, really early. And it's a great skill to have. It's really useful in every aspect of life. You learn a work ethic from a really young age, which helps in high school and college. And there's a lot of those skills. You also get a lot of really soft skills in terms of perseverance and discipline and kind of committing to something over the course of 5 or 6 years. And that's really useful as well for high school and college and the career afterwards. And I think the last bit here is like the friends are also the really important piece, and that's kind of the piece that sort of keeps us or keeps me excited about the spelling bee is like, and I've said this a bunch of times, but I'm still really, really close friends with a lot of people that I met during the spelling bee over 10 years ago. And that's a really invaluable part of the experience. And these are people that you'll go to some like great colleges, and these are people you'll see at those colleges, and you'll see them in careers as you progress in your life. And so I feel like the community has a really interesting way of just keep continuing to run into each other. And so I think if all of that's interesting and you really love words and want to dedicate a lot of time to it, it's 100% worth doing. And there's a lot of really great benefits that come out of it. So all right. Thank you all so much for the really great answers here and all of the really insightful thoughts. We have a couple more minutes, so I just want to see if there's any final questions from anyone in the audience around anything that we haven't addressed already. Just feel free to raise your hand in Zoom or type something in the chat. Yeah, Ramya, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hey, Shobha, thanks for arranging this, and lovely to see all the finalists. And I think you spent a lot of time explaining a lot of stuff. My kid is in 5th grade and really into spelling. If any one of you all are interested in coaching, how can we get in touch with you all? Could you send out your contact information via SpellPundit or something? I mean,
yeah, or I guess any one of you panelists, feel free to opt out. But if you just want to leave an email or phone number, whatever the best way to contact you is, just if you want to put it in the chat, people can get that information now. We're also happy to compile it and send it with our follow-up email after the meeting.
thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Adish, what's your question?
So whenever you have a language pattern for a certain language and a sound in that language pattern can be spelled multiple different ways, how are you supposed to know which spelling of that sound is correct?
Right. Does anyone want to take a stab at that? Yeah, the question was basically, sorry, I'll summarize it. The question was basically, there's a lot of language patterns, and a good example of this is the A sound in French, right? Where you have EE, ET, AY sometimes, but you have like 7 different ways to spell the same sound. How have you all thought about distinguishing, or is that just something you memorize?
With everything, there are general patterns. Like for AY, they usually, I don't know if this is a set rule set in stone, but they usually tend to be like geographical words like game or dorse. I don't know if that's set in stone, but like that's just a general pattern. And I think pattern recognition is something that you develop over the years, and you just get better and better at it,
Yeah, I think it's probably helpful if there's like specific language patterns you have questions on, and you can also feel free to email any one of these finalists or even SpellPundit, and we can help kind of answer that. But yeah, it's sort of there's specific patterns, and some of the books and SpellPundit has information on this. But for example, in French, to Dave's example, if a word has gone through English as well, sometimes it will have AY rather than like EAU, for example, and it just kind of depends on the progression of the word and other factors of it. So it's really dependent on the language pattern, but kind of seeing a lot of examples and kind of building an intuition is probably the best advice, and that just takes time.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Zishan, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
A tip for vocabulary is try to simplify the definition. For example,
a genus name, okay, of a plant. It might have a complicated definition, so I can simplify it to just the plant.
Yeah, that's a good tip and can definitely help to kind of simplify and help you remember as well as group words together under a category. So that's great. Thank you. Who's next? Navia, do you want to ask your question?
I just wanted to ask a question about like study motivation. I don't know if you guys already answered this, but like I have lots of trouble with that. And I mean, I do enjoy like studying words, but sometimes it's usually in the fourth hour of studying. I always feel like I'm just too tired and I can't really do it. But I just wanted to ask for any tips for that.
Um, I would say if you're like feeling tired, like take a break. Like I went on like walks when I was feeling tired, or I did like, or I played my instrument or something like that. Try not to like go on your phone or go on social media while you're taking a break, because I find that's like it's distracting and it's hard to get back into studying well after you do that. But yeah, just take breaks when you're feeling tired. And most importantly, just like have fun with it. And like yeah, if you're having fun, it's easier to study. It's easier to motivate yourself when you're having fun. So yeah, just do like try to find a method of studying that you find works out for you and is enjoyable for you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're tired, a method that could work is the Pomodoro method. Pretty much you study for a certain amount of time and then you take a break. You can use different timers online that do for like 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break, 30 minutes, take a 5-minute break. So, yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I use the Pomodoro technique. And like if I felt tired, I'm a very extroverted person. So like I get my energy from talking to people and just like I don't know, being myself. So I would just, talk to people. Like I know this goes against what Surya just said, but like I would go on my phone and I would talk to like someone for 10 minutes, or I just like I don't know, I'd go on a walk with my stuffed animal. Yeah, just be yourself during your breaks. Study hard
Yeah.
and play hard.
I think like talking with people online is a good break. I just try not to I don't know, like try not to like scroll, I guess. Like don't scroll on TikTok or like
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Instagram.
that's another
That's
thing.
gonna like make you it's harder to study after you do that.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
I deleted Instagram and TikTok before the bees just to help with that.
Yeah, adding on to this, I just want to say like for me at least any studying that I did while I was super tired, like while I was really burned out, it wouldn't be effective. So it's really important to know, like kind of know your limits. Sometimes studying 8 hours a day is not what's best for everybody. For me, the quality of studying is a lot more important than the quantity because you can learn a lot more when you're not pushing yourself beyond where your mind can go.
Thank you.
Yeah, to add on to that, like there would be times that I would study at like 1 or 2 a.m. and I can like confidently say that that didn't help me. It's more important to like uh get rest, get sleep. So don't like study too late or like it's not going to be useful. So yeah, I strongly agree with the quality over quantity.
All right. And let's take our last question from Gauri.
So I wanted to ask, like, if you reach really far to the nationals or something, and if you lose, how do you remotivate yourself?
Yeah, maybe Dave, do you want to take that question since you've had that experience?
Oh my God, yeah. Believe me, I've had that experience. Um, I had a support system. I had a support system. Make friends with the people in your spelling community. There is not a single speller that hasn't Like every speller in this panel, every speller in this Zoom meeting has at least gotten out before. Have a support group, and talk to them and take as much time as you need to just like, get back. Like after I got out SpellPundit B this year, I just did not study for 2 days. Like I just did what I enjoyed. So, just like know when to take breaks.
Okay. That being said, then let's end on that note. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all to every one of our panelists for all of your great answers and really helpful and insightful answers today. So yeah, we will follow up with some more information. We'll share contact information as well as the recording of this webinar. And yeah, thank you all. And if there's ever any questions about preparing for the spelling bee or what sort of modules might be most helpful, feel free to reach out to us at SpellPundit as well, and we can help to answer some of those questions. Thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your Saturday. Is the best way to do this.